What's good, Atlanta? This is the Blog and Dirty podcast, where Dirty Bird is the word. If you haven't heard, I'm your host, John Buhler, lead writer for FanSided. Coming to you guys semi-live today on a very cold Wednesday afternoon. Hope everybody's been able to stay safe out there with this crazy weather we've been having across the southeastern United States. But before we begin, be sure to hit that like button, smash that subscribe button, give this thing a 5-star review. You know, it really helps us out here with Blog and Dirty Bird Nation. Again, I'm John Buhler, lead writer of FanSided. This is Atlanta Falcons podcast for the FanSided site Blog and Dirty. Let's get rolling here, man. We got a new head coach. Let's get started with our first run of the day here with this. Kevin Stefanski is kind of a breath of fresh air at the podium on Tuesday. He's not Raheem Morris. And you know what? That's good. This is a guy who, we hired him amid some controversy. It seems as though everybody outside of Atlanta raved about the hire. People in Atlanta are still beholden to what Deion Sanders did before he had internet, because that's apparently really important here. It's also hilarious that, Shedeur Sanders is a Pro Bowler after, going very 7-10 with touchdowns and interceptions as a part-time starter. It's great. But I watched a good bit of the press conference there yesterday, from Flowery Branch, or I think it was actually in the Mercedes-Benz. It doesn't matter, but I watched it online because that's what we do here when we got other jobs to do. It's become very apparent that Kevin Stefanski is not a BSer, and I think that that's kind of something that ultimately defined Raheem Morris. Look, Stefanski's not going to be as abrasive with the media as I would say that Arthur Smith was, but he's not going to be, a rah guy like Raw or Dan Quinn or anything like that. I've seen some people out there say he's probably more in line with what Mike Smith was, who I think is the greatest head coach of Atlanta Falcons history, or the best guy we've ever had since I've been a fan. And we've also had Dan Reeves be head coach here too. So I'll say it as that. It was very interesting at the podium for me to see it was just Matt Ryan and it was just Kevin Stefanski. Like, this was Matt Ryan's first big move as president of football. We didn't have Arthur Blank up there holding his hand. We didn't have Greg Beatles. We didn't have Josh Blank up there. This was about Matt Ryan introducing Kevin Stefanski to the Atlanta Falcons media. And I thought that was, this is his move. He stuck his neck out there. And the first thing Stefanski said was, I'm not devoid of criticism. If you need to criticize me, you can come at me. It's fine, but don't blame me from the weather. That was kind of his joke coming down from Cleveland. He leaves a frozen place up there in Lake Erie, and it's been pretty cold here in Atlanta. He did mention, though, at the press conference that this is the job that he wanted. I don't necessarily know if he was buttering our biscuit or if that's true, but he's the head coach of the Atlanta Falcons, and couldn't be more excited about that. I found the way that he answered the questions at the podium was that of a seasoned head coach. It wasn't like he was trying to preface or posture or, acting like, he's sitting in the big chair that he doesn't belong in. Like, he's a football coach. He's been a head coach at the Browns. He took the Browns to the playoffs twice. He won a playoff game more recently than the Steelers, beat them head to head. And they now have Mike McCarthy giddy like a child there, being the head coach of his childhood's team. Obviously, Stefanski's not going to be that for the Eagles, a team that he and Matt Ryan grew up rooting for from Philadelphia. I get that. But he also said that Matt Ryan is all about winning. And even though that's kind of become like a laughingstock in some capacities here with the Falcons, because we are the architects of 28-3, we also have, haven't been to the playoffs in almost a decade. Every team in the NFC has been more recently than us. It's kind of the way it goes here. But Matt Ryan's kind of been here for all of the best moments this franchise has had. He was a common thread that really, without him, what are we? We're Michael Vick, we're the original Dirty Birds, we're, Grits Blitz, a little bit here and there, but like a lot of losing, a lot of really bad football here. So it's a little more serious. And I think with Raheem Morris, he's a likable guy. I think people liked him being around him, but, I feel like in a way that got in the way of us actually winning games. You look at this team last 2 years that went 8-9, 8-9. It was poised to win now both years, and it didn't do it. The division's in flux. Tampa's kind of circling the drain. New Orleans is rebuilding. Carolina's kind of on the come up. They won the division in a year that probably should have been us, but we didn't do it because we got swept by the Panthers. Couldn't beat the Jets. Didn't take care of business versus the Dolphins. Special teams got in the way versus the Buccaneers the first time through, the Patriots. You name it. Also, the Falcons have hired a new special teams coordinator. I think it's Craig Ackerman, formerly of the Dolphins. And again, like these things matter. You look at the Rams having some interesting special teams, and that had been a bastion for them, and that's why they're not playing the Super Bowl. Don't ever tell me that special teams don't matter. Special teams matter a ton. That's the difference between winning and losing games at this stage of the year. When it comes to making the playoffs or getting to a Super Bowl, you got to be proficient in special teams because everybody you're going up against is, and you can't not be. So I'll say this with Stefanski kind of before moving on to the next part of our show here. I just kind of want us to be a serious football operation, and it seems as though he's going to be that. Look, he is a retread hire. I know Raheem Morris technically was, but it was 15 years in between head coaching opportunities with him. First with the Bucs, then eventually with the Falcons. We know that he had been with the Washington franchise, he with the Rams, been all over the place before. So I get that it's a different thing. Stefanski, prior to being in Cleveland, had been the head offensive coordinator for the Minnesota Vikings, a guy that, has a lot of respect there from coaches who are serious people like Gary Kubiak and Mike Zimmer. Those are kind of the guys that's kind of what he came up with. I also think it's very important to him that he's going to be working for an owner that has a lot of respect for the people he works with. Look, there have been faults with Arthur Blank's ownership the last decade. I've been among them to say that. That's how it goes. But I will say this. I think he treats people fairly and with decency and with respect. I can't necessarily say that with some of the other 30 owners in the NFL. We all know the reputation that Jimmy Haslam has with Cleveland and everything like that. And this isn't about like attacking him or anything like that. But I do think that Kevin Stefanski upgraded big time from Haslam to Blank. Hopefully he does that in the winning department here. And I guess like the last thing that I'll say is, he took the time. He answered everybody's questions to the best of his ability with a lot of respect. Again, he's coming in here new, and I think he's trying to build something. I think he knows that this is his last opportunity to be an NFL head coach. Look, not everybody's going to be Mike McCarthy, where you fall ass backwards into being a head coach of three of the most storied franchises in NFL history, whether that's the Packers, the Cowboys, and Steelers. Like for Stefanski, it's the Browns and the Falcons. That's kind of what he's dealing with. That's his lot in life. That's kind of what Matt Ryan is. He didn't get recruited super highly out of William Penn Charter. He got to play at like Boston College. It was between that and like Georgia Tech. He wasn't going to go play for like Michigan, Ohio State, Georgia, or any major college football power at that time. It just wasn't in the cards for him. But they're aligned. They've got a similar vision, and I can't wait to see what they build here in the coming days, weeks, and months and years. It's gonna be a good time. So that's what I got here for our first run. Let's move on to our second run of the day. This is gonna be all about the general manager search, and it looks as though the Falcons have kind of honed in on their two finalists for the job. That would be Chicago Bears front office executive Ian Cunningham and Houston Texans front office executive James Liipfert. So this is interesting. Ian Cunningham is the guy who serves under Ryan Poles there in Chicago. Again, Ryan Poles is a Boston College guy, just like Matt Ryan. Obviously, can't hire Ryan Poles. Don't want him here, but obviously, I've been one of the biggest Ryan Poles critics of all time. But he's come out for a really great year in Chicago, so more power to him. But Ian Cunningham, I think, is the guy that has been the favorite for this job for a while. He was one of the five guys who interviewed for the president of football gig that ultimately went to Matt Ryan. Again, that's kind of more of a figurehead position, but then again, Matt Ryan had everything to do with the Falcons hiring Kevin Stefanski. I do think Josh Blank played a pretty big part in that too. Arthur Blank kind of sat back, listened, and heard what everybody had to say. Greg Beatles was clearly there. Apparently, Joe Thomas was there cooking steaks. I don't know. It's all good. It's all fun. But anyway, like that. Ian Cunningham was the guy, along with Josh Williams, the front office executive there with the 49ers, who everybody was kind of looking at as like the first two guys to get this gig. It wasn't going to be Matt Ryan. Maybe they're going to be GMs. They also interviewed Brant Tillis from the Panthers. They also interviewed, what's his name? Mike Disner with the Lions. So I think they brought Williams back in for a second interview. And then James Liipfert kind of came in here. He played at Georgia Tech. I think he's from Again, some part of Georgia. I'm blanking on the name there. He's from the Texans front office. He's with, Nick Caserio and everything like that. And again, I think it's interesting that we're looking at two guys from playoff teams from a year ago who have a franchise quarterback who've kind of hit like not necessarily a ceiling, but like they're teams that I think we would expect will be in the playoffs next year. Houston, we're kind of wondering like, okay, is CJ Stroud going to figure it out? With the Bears, maybe we're a bit more optimism there. What's Caleb Williams going to look like in the big stage? But they're also coming from GMs that I don't really love all that much. Again, I've been a critic of Ryan Poles for most of my career. Don't think Nick Caserio is particularly great with Houston. He did build up one hell of a defense, though, but I think that's kind of more on D'Amico Ryans and Matt Burke. But that's neither here nor there. I would say right now that the biggest things you guys got to know here is it's Ian Cunningham's job until it's not. And I think the fact that it's not going to be Josh Williams and that it could be James Liipfert leads me to believe that the longer this goes on, maybe Liipfert is the fit. I think it's really going to come down to like how well do Cunningham and Liipfert, how do they jive? How do they fit with Ryan, Stefanski, and the Blanks and Beatles? Like how do they fit? How do they fit the puzzle piece here? Again, this is a step up because this is a general manager gig, but you also have Matt Ryan, kind of at the front of this all, as the president of football. So you got to answer to him in some ways. Stefanski is also going to be a part with this too. Again, Atlanta's kind of gone about this completely different than anybody else. It's been very interesting that like they hire a head coach before they hire a GM. But again, we understand that this was a unique cycle. 7 of the jobs, I think 8 of the jobs have been filled up now. I think only the Raiders and Arizona are open now because you go across the board. The Giants hired John Harbaugh first. We weren't going to get him. That seems like it's hand in glove. We get Kevin Stefanski because there are opportunities out there to be had. Not long after that, I believe the Titans hired Robert Saleh. They were very high on him. I'm trying to think who was hired third here. Baltimore's got Jesse Minter coming over from the Chargers. The Steelers have hired Mike McCarthy. The Bills just hired Joe Brady from within after Sean McDermott failed. The Browns just hired Todd Monken before I came on. They are former Baltimore Ravens and Georgia and Tampa Bay Buccaneers offensive coordinator. I'm trying to think who else is out there. I'm missing somebody very obvious here. Head coaching, NFL head coaches. Let's see, who else is this? Let's see who else. Oh, the Dolphins hired the Dolphins was the other one. They hired Jeff Halfley. That seemed like that came together pretty quickly right now. We're going to go through here. Do this. Andy Reid's the longest tenured head coach in the NFL. Unbelievable. Stefanski in Atlanta, Minter at Baltimore, Brady at Buffalo, Monken in Cleveland, Halfley in Miami, Harbaugh in New York, McCarthy, Pittsburgh, Saleh in Tennessee, obviously. Arizona and the Raiders are still open. I think the Raiders are kind of looking at potentially Davis Webb. Maybe it'll end up being Clint Kubiak. Arizona with Greg Rudinsky and Anthony Campanelli coming back to Jacksonville. It might be our guy Raheem Morris there in the Valley of the Sun. So get ready for that. This thing is a disaster. But anyway, the Raiders, it might be Kubiak. Maybe they're kind of waiting to sit on that. But then again, apparently he describes himself a bit as a wet blanket, and that's not good. I don't think that's what you wanted to hear. And then his dad, Gary, spoke highly of Stefanski. So that's what I'm feeling. So let's tie a bow on this with Ian Cunningham and James Liipfert. There's 2 I's there. I didn't mess it up here. Hopefully, as I'm looking across the ticker here, I'm like, hopefully I didn't spell anything wrong. But the fact that like these 2 guys are coming in for in-person interviews, I would venture to guess by the time we do this show next week, again, I don't know exactly what time it's going to be. Maybe it's Tuesday evening. Maybe it'll be Wednesday evening. Again, I'm going to try to figure out a time that we're going to be able to do this. Again, a lot of our video team is going to be down or be at the Super Bowl in the Bay Area for, Patriots, Seahawks, and we'll see how that goes. But yeah, I will be doing a show for you guys next week. Again, we're gonna have a new GM, so I would venture to guess we'll have a new GM. I think that weather kind of played a factor in this a little bit. Maybe that delayed Stefanski getting, being in front of the media yesterday, first kind of day where people went back to work. Wasn't just a frozen hellhole here in Atlanta. I'll say this with Cunningham. This has kind of been the guy that Atlanta's keyed in on as, outside of Matt Ryan, the guy they've been the most excited about. So I would not be surprised if it ultimately ends up being him. I think, again, he was a finalist for both the President of Football and for GM. May not look great if he goes somewhere else. Liipfert, obviously, you've got the Georgia Tech ties. You got the Houston ties. You're from Georgia. That'd be another. That's like the dark horse, I would say here, but it's clearly those two. Obviously, with Josh Williams going back to San Francisco, I think it kind of said, like, look, you're really only a dark horse at this point, and it kind of leads me to believe it's either going to be Cunningham or Liipfert. Maybe it's one of those two. And then that's clearly what the Falcons are trying to do here. Hopefully, by the time we do a show next week, we'll have some answers here and we'll talk about that. And maybe he'll be introduced for the team too. We can hear what he has to say. So let's move on to our past here. Kirk Cousins is definitely not part of this team next year. I'm going to try to be nice, but I don't think I can. It jumped off the screen to me. So obviously, when they opened up questions to the media with Kevin Stefanski, they went with the Orlando Ledford of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. He was the first guy. Didn't even acknowledge his name. Didn't say what publication he was from. He kind of went with this very half-assed talk about questions. And he says, I know you have a working relationship with Kirk Cousins. Is he going to be part of this team next year? Again, that's a question you have to ask, I guess. But look, there's no GM here yet. It kind of felt like a waste of a hire. Maybe you just sit on that and you ask that a little bit more when you introduce the next GM, whether that's Ian Cunningham, whether that's James Liipfert. But Cousins has restructured his contract so that, we can cut him March 1st. It'll free up a lot more space. Again, if Cousins is going to come back to Atlanta, it's going to be not for the money he's going to be making now. I have seen with Stefanski's press conferences and every time he's talked, he's been spoken very highly of Michael Penix Jr., and he loves Bijan Robinson, which is why he's the title card for this. Also, if you go to Stefanski, the last couple of years, Browns have been fantastic running the football. And that's going to, with the declining Nick Chubb. Got a good offensive line. I think that's going to be a focal point for us as well. And again, I'll touch on that probably here with our punt sort of segment here. I'm just kind of like, look, there's a non-zero chance that Cousins is back with the Falcons, but I think it's far more likely that we end up getting somebody like Jameis Winston or Joe Flacco or somebody else who's got ties with Stefanski to kind of serve as the backup, maybe a stopgap before Penix is here. And I know that Penix kind of got shredded there towards the end because it was like he didn't run anything out of, under center. It was all shotgun or pistol. That might be more of the Zach Robinson variety. Again, this is a guy who, Tampa hired because he saved his best for Tampa. I'll give him that. But I don't necessarily know how that's going to mesh there in Tampa for the Bucs here. It is going to be Tommy Rees calling the plays on offense, for the Falcons and everything like that. I'll touch on that here in just a second. But look, the Falcons are going to have a new regime here. This is a new era of Atlanta Falcons football. It's become very apparent that that is the case. There's a lot to like with this roster. But as is the case every year, the rosters change. Like a third of it changes out each year. Players come, players go. You got to figure this out. And I'll give Terry Fontenot credit. He didn't necessarily put us in a bad cap situation. I always thought he was very mindful of the cap. But obviously, some of his draft picks didn't work out. Some of his free agent acquisitions didn't work out. Other things have worked out wonderfully. I don't think he was that bad of a job, but obviously, if you're gonna move on from Raheem Morris and him, you got to do it together to give yourself an opportunity to have alignment, to have symmetry, to have people coming in. And the Falcons may or may not have screwed that up here with the way that they went about hiring Ryan, then Stefanski before they got GM. We'll see how that goes. But again, what if you had a worse head coach coming in with no experience instead of Stefanski? That could have been very problematic here. I just think for the money, and for what Cousins can do, like unless he's going to be signing for like $10 million a year, like I don't see him coming back. It's just not on the cards. And it was very important for Stefanski to kind of get out there and say, like, look, I'm not going to answer the questions about that. And I respect him for that. I applaud him for not falling into D-Led's bait. and that's okay. And let's move on. Let's move on to our punt guide here, man, with this. I don't know how it's going to be with Tommy Rees calling plays, and I'm not necessarily so sure letting Dwayne Ledford go to the Ravens is a great thing. These are the two big things with the offense. And again, it's also great. Nate Ollie is going to be back on Jeff Ulbricht's defensive staff. That's fantastic. This is a guy that was getting some serious looks from other opportunities. This is a guy who's probably a future defensive coordinator in the league. One of the biggest reasons why the pass rush for the Falcons went from bottom eighth to top eighth in the league. Obviously, continuity on defense is going to be key with this team and this franchise moving forward as the offense adjusts. But this is really kind of what it comes down to here. I'm willing to give Tommy Rees the benefit of the doubt. Obviously, I know what Bill Callahan's capable of as, offensive line coach. Ledford going to the Ravens. Ravens don't do anything half-assed. They're a very smart, savvy football team. Getting him to be on Jesse Minter's first staff there in Baltimore is substantial. And I think that could work out wonderfully for the Ravens. They've got Derrick Henry, too, who's just a rock. I don't care that he's in his early 30s. The guy can still play. This is a big get for the Ravens. And I would be stunned if the Ravens are not back in the playoffs next year, which would justify them moving on from John Harbaugh in favor of one of Jim Harbaugh's proteges and Jesse Minter. So I get that. So, again, Bill Callahan's, I guess, one of the best offensive line coaches in NFL history. We're talking up there with Dante Scarnecchia, up there with Alex Gibbs, just a true innovator at the position. And I think the fact that he's kind of got ties to Stefanski, and I think the fact that the Browns have always been able to run the football, even when they're not a great team, I think that matters. Obviously, Brian Callahan's not going to be calling plays because it's Bill Callahan. His dad's on the team. Tommy Rees is coming over from Cleveland, and I know there's quite a big cross section of people who are both Alabama fans and Falcons fans. I would say beyond Falcons Georgia and Falcons Tech, like this is a very common crossover. I'd say Falcons Auburn's a very big crossover as well. Maybe Falcons Clemson in some capacities, although that may be a little bit more with Carolina too. Again, it kind of bleeds there a little bit. Look, Tommy Rees is a little bit younger than me. I think he's in his early to mid 30s as opposed to his mid to late 30s like myself. God, I'm getting old. Just an old bastard here. Anyway, he called plays for Nick Saban, in Tuscaloosa in his final year with Bill O'Brien, leaving to become the head coach, I think, at Boston College at some point. Again, I'm not really sure how that all lines up there. But Tommy Rees, former Notre Dame quarterback, left his alma mater, had been, I think, with LSU a little bit. Remember how that was controversial? So he's been around. He was quarterback there. He was the OC when Jalen Milroe first kind of came on the scenes there with Alabama. Alabama made the playoff. They won the SEC that year. They beat Georgia in Atlanta in 23. And then I think it was with Cleveland recently. He called plays last year, I guess, down the stretch. Again, Cleveland wasn't very good. What you have to remember is the only Pro Bowl quarterback Kevin Stefanski ever saw apparently is Shedeur Sanders. And that's kind of like Tyler Huntley was a Pro Bowler. What are you doing, man? I'm willing to give him the benefit of the doubt because this is something that I thought is very astute. And I wish I could give credit to the right person there in Falcons Twitter. Might have been Scott Karasik, friend of the program, potentially. I'll say this. At least with Tommy Rees, he has experience calling plays, both in college and the NFL. I could definitively say, yeah, he called plays with Alabama. Yes, he called plays there with Cleveland. When Zach Robinson came over from the Rams, I'm like, he's just behind Sean McVay. Like, what does he actually do? And we're like, oh, the McVay-Shanahan coaching tree, like, this is going to work out wonderfully for us. Not really. He never really adapted. Honestly, I thought that was kind of coaching malpractice. And look, you can only build the staff you can build. When you're this is also something that I want to say before I get out of here. One of the reasons that I was a fan of the Falcons hiring Stefanski, and clearly, you're looking across the board at the guys who are head coaches now. You look at this. Kevin Stefanski is a former head coach. Todd Monken's a former head coach. Jeff Hafley is a former head coach. John Harbaugh is a former head coach. Mike McCarthy and Robert Saleh. You're talking about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 of the 8 guys who have been hired, have head coaching experience. I think what Minter does not, and I don't think Brady does, but these are kind of new up-and-comers. These are kind of your hotshot coordinators. And again, Hafley is former head coach at BC. Todd Monken, former head coach at Southern Miss. So this is college. It's a little bit different. But I think being able to be in front of the podium, being able to represent the entire team and not just one side of the ball, that's big. And I think that's kind of one of the things that's possibly hurt Clint Kubiak throughout this cycle. Maybe he's the guy for the Raiders. Maybe he's going to be back for another year. Maybe, we have this happen sometimes where there's this hot shot coordinator where they got to wait. We saw that with Ben Johnson. We saw that with Brian Daboll the first time, who's now going to be the OC there for Robert Saleh. Maybe the Titans are a team on the come up now. But when you have a head coach who has previous head coaching experience, especially at the same level where you're at, you have the ability to build quite an interesting staff. And again, Raheem Morris had been that. That was 15 years ago. Like it's a different sort of thing. I'm not saying that what worked for the Browns is going to work for us, because it didn't work for the Browns and it may not work for us. But when you become a head coach, one of the first things that they do through the process, whether you're talking to the general manager, the owner, the president of football operations, what have you, is like, okay, who's your staff going to be? And who can you get? Who is in your binders of guys you think you can get to be on your staff? Because you got to sell people on that. You got to sell them on the vision, not just you, but who's coming with you. And all these names that have been tied to Stefanski, these are people that they know: Tommy Rees, Bill Callahan, Craig Aukerman, obviously Jeff Ulbricht's being retained. We know about him. So this isn't some like new guy that nobody's ever heard of that has to kind of like learn a new job on the fly. Like they've come in there, they've done this role before. And when you have that, like that gives you a better chance at success, because not only have you had success potentially in this role, but you've also had failure that you can learn from. So again, I'm willing to give Tommy Rees the benefit of the doubt here, and same with Bill Callahan. I do think Dwayne Ledford's going to have a lot of success there. And Baltimore, being on Jesse Minter's staff, it's going to be interesting to see what happens here, as well as who the Cardinals and the Raiders hire. And this was episode 78 of the Blog and Dirty Podcast. You can follow me, John Buhler, on Twitter or the X at Buhler118. You can follow the show on Twitter or the X at Blog and Dirty. You can follow along on YouTube at Blog and Dirty FS. Like, rate, listen, subscribe, review on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, anywhere there's podcasts. Give this thing a 5-star review. I got my Falcon shirt on today. Look at this. It's off brand, but it's the same sort of thing. I came here pumped up today. It's also cold. It was next sweater in the sweater rotation, but that's how it goes. And excited about what this team can do. Very anxious to see if it's going to be Cunningham or Liipfert joining the Holy Trinity of the Atlanta Falcons brass with Ryan and Stefanski. It's going to be a lot of fun. But I don't necessarily know what time I'm going to be doing the show. It may be Tuesday evening. It may be Wednesday evening. Again, I kind of got something I got to do on Wednesday. But there will be a show next week. It'll be up here, and I'll put it out there. I'll fire it out there to the internet during Super Bowl week. We'll be talking about Falcons, possibly some Super Bowl. It's going to be a good time. That's how it always is on the show. Once again, thanks for listening. And this is the Blog and Dirty Podcast.